AI complicates the model entirely because for a long time, the comparison and the defining features of what a human being is, and there's a lot of thought in the Torah that goes into what makes human beings special, and therefore what is our mission, what is our purpose, what makes us unique. And for a long time, it was in comparison to animals. So people thought, oh, yeah, that ruach, that level of cognitive functioning is really what, that's where we're different from them. That's where we get the edge. And then in comes AI. And AI is so good cognitively. It is so good. It is scary how good an LLM is at as you said, asking questions and digesting data, and the speed at which it does it. It's astounding and it's amazing. It's really amazing. It makes us rethink what consciousness is and what sentience is, because until AI showed up, there was a correlation. There was a one-to-one correlation. They went hand in hand. The level of cognitive ability and the level of sentience. The more sentience and the more cognitive ability, as in the human being is the most sentient and conscious being, and also the most cognitively adept. And then AI comes in, and it's like, well, where do we place that thing?
This is the Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish perspective podcast, where we take ambiguous moral situations in fictional popular movies and TV shows and analyze them from a Torah lens. All right, Rabbi David Kosofsky, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, so first, thanks for joining us on this episode. And obviously, Ex Machina, AI, like literally the topic of the day. People can't stop talking about it. I work as an attorney. AI comes up all the time. So an important topic to address. And I guess just before we get started, can you tell us a bit about yourself, and then we can get into the episode itself, and we'll start presenting the dilemma.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. Once upon a time, went to university, went to college a long time ago now. I went to Wash U, where you are. You're there. You're in St. Louis.
Yeah, so I'm not in St. Louis anymore, but that is where I went to law school. I went to Wash U Law. That's right. Yeah.
Right. So I went to Wash U undergrad, and that's connection there. I studied philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology, trying to understand the mind from a couple of different angles, from the philosophical side, psychology, and also the neuroscience. My dad is a neuroscientist, neurologist. He's a MD, PhD, so he's a big inspiration for me in there. That informed what I studied in college and a lot of my explorations. And then when I went to yeshiva after that, I think a big motivation was to figure out what life is about and what consciousness is about. On the journey, seeing what the Torah had to say about consciousness. People used to ask me after I went to yeshiva, people say, what did you study in college? And I said, philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. It's basically like secular Torah. That's how I like. There's something very, I feel, spiritual about it, and which I hope we can talk about later, but there's something I think inherently spiritual about the mind and about consciousness that leads to thinking about things beyond, which has always been interesting to me. So here I am now. Now I live in Jerusalem. My wife is from Australia. We lived in Australia for a little bit. We were doing Kiruv, we're doing Jewish outreach. So meeting with young Jewish college kids and taking them on trips to Israel and teaching and doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And now we live in Jerusalem. I'm an avid meditator. And I teach in a yeshiva over here once a week on Torah and consciousness. That's basically the topic of the series. And we do practical meditations and look at the Torah sources that talk about it. So this is a big passion of mine, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have it. To have you here to talk about that. That sounds like a great background. And it's kind of funny as you were speaking about how you were studying secular Torah. It's kind of interesting how we both studied very different things in WashU. Like you studied like consciousness and the mind, and I was studying law. That is also kind of like secular Torah. Like yeshiva deals with like halacha in terms of Jewish law and the study of the texts. Then you also have obviously like, what's life all about? What are we meant to be doing here? How do we think? So that's great. So thank you yeshiva, and thank you WashU.
Yeah.
We'll see how much that informs us. So Ex Machina is effectively about, there are like 3 or 4 main characters. There's Nathan, there's Caleb, and there's Ava. Nathan is this, billionaire programmer who effectively created the Google of the movie. It's called Blue Book, but he created this huge search engine. And Nathan invites Caleb, who's this young programmer, to come visit Nathan for a week. Now Nathan lives in this kind of super remote location where there's no civilization, there's nowhere. It's like this idyllic paradise. It's beautiful around. And the reason why Nathan invites Caleb there is to test Ava. Ava is this machine. She's this robot, this AI. And Nathan wants Caleb to see if Ava is able to pass the Turing test in terms of does Caleb realize that this is just a machine, or is Caleb convinced that this machine has achieved personhood, that it really feels like and is a real person? That's Caleb's job over the week. Throughout the week, Caleb and Ava obviously have a bunch of interactions. Ava tells Caleb that she wants to kind of escape and run away with him, and then Nathan is like this villain who's trapping the robots in town, like in his complex. And Caleb eventually finds these videos of these pre-Avas that are like, beating against the walls, trying to escape, like kind of breaking their machinery apart as they're desperate to leave. And Caleb is taken in and wants to help her escape. Nathan, towards the end, tells Caleb, yeah, like Ava fooled you. I programmed her to try to escape. So what she's been trying to do is to just convince you and manipulate you into getting you to escape. Turns out that Caleb, actually behind Nathan's back, was able to get Ava to escape. So she got out of her complex, and Ava and this other robot, Kyoko, end up killing Nathan. And then instead of allowing Caleb to leave with her, Ava just leaves Caleb there. She escapes, she gets out, and Caleb is trapped in the complex. So now, the question that comes up that people debate online very vigorously is, did Caleb owe a moral duty to help Ava, which he wanted to do, but also Kyoko, the other robot? People criticize Caleb because he was only focused on Ava because he liked her. He wasn't focused on Kyoko. So that's our question. Did Caleb owe Ava and Kyoko a moral duty to help them, even though they're robots? Right? And I guess more broadly, do we have a moral obligation to robots? Assuming that, they have AI, so they're intelligent, whatever that means. But that overall is our big question. Do we have a moral obligation towards AI, towards robots? And did Caleb owe a moral obligation towards Ava and Kyoko?
Okay, so it's a hot topic. It's a great question. AI blew up, and here we are. And I think the short answer to do we have a moral obligation to robots is no. I think that's really the short answer. The reason that is because we would say that they don't have sentience. Sentience is the valenced experience of life. So if something is painful and you can an entity can experience that pain as negative or experience pleasure as positive. So that's what we would call sentience. It's a low grade form of consciousness. It's not as there are levels. There's a spectrum of sentience to consciousness. So there are more advanced elements of consciousness. But basic sentience is that ability to basically suffer. If an entity, if something can suffer, and we think that it suffers, so then we would say we have a moral obligation towards those types of things. And something that doesn't have sentience, again, this is in secular philosophical thought, we wouldn't have a moral obligation towards them. For example, a wooden table, we wouldn't think twice about cutting it in half because we don't think the wood is going to be hurt or upset or have a negative experience from that. Whereas a human being, which is the most clear case, obviously would experience pain if you poked it with a needle. So therefore, we that would be immoral. We have a moral obligation to prevent suffering of a human being.
I mean, there are two ways to go about this. Now, I think the most basic is kind of your approach. Taking, let's say, instead of like a table, let's say like a printer. Say you like kick a printer and it starts beeping. It's not beeping because it's in pain. It's just malfunctioning or whatever it is. Like it's a machine. That's all it is. So when these like robots, when you see this recording, it seems very sympathetic when you see these robots like literally smashing their arms against the wall, looking at the camera, hoping to escape. And their arms are literally breaking as they're like kind of breaking themselves on the wall. But they're machines. They're just programmed to do that. Like when Ava left Caleb, some people were like, oh, didn't you see she wanted to escape? I was like, the movie literally says that she was programmed to try to escape. She wasn't programmed to save anyone else. Her job was escape. Once she escaped, mission completed. That's all. Like if I which I did, I printed out a paper before this recording, and the printer printed my paper. Voila! They did exactly what I told it to do, just like Ava did what she was supposed to do. But people push back against that. And well, I guess perhaps like one of two things. Why is it that only suffering is first, can you program suffering into a computer? I'll let you handle that one.
Right. So, okay. So let's just put kind of a paradigm on the board to think about this. So I'm switching to the Torah world of thought now, and we're going to bounce back between this kind of the secular philosophical worldview and then the Torah worldview. And so in the Torah worldview, there are 3 levels to the soul. Really, there are 5 levels to the soul, but the upper 2 are, it's a little bit esoteric. The lower 3, they're called nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Okay, and I'm using the Hebrew words because there isn't really a good English translation for them. A nefesh is like an animating soul. It's like a animating life force. And we would say that animals have a nefesh. Okay, and then the ruach is cognitive thought. So that is cognitive thought, which is more advanced and more sophisticated than the thought processes happening in kind of that more animalistic soul. Where it's more of those basic drives and the basic feelings and the basic emotions are happening in the nefesh. The level of the cognitive soul of ruach is more complicated over there, more sophisticated. We would say most animals don't have that. And then you have something called the neshama. The neshama is exclusive to human beings. It's a very refined, beautiful part of the human being. It's the most special, intrinsic part of the human being. It's what I would call pure consciousness, just the pure being, the being of the person, their personality, their most essentialness. And that for sure is above animals, and for sure above animals. Now,
is that like neshama? Is that like the way we would refer to as the soul, like what God blew into man?
Yep, correct.
Okay, got it.
And we would say it's a unique feature of being human, is that we have this thing called the neshama. We have certain aspects of consciousness that no other species has. We have a certain ability of self-awareness and the ability to ask questions. Very interestingly comes from there. Actually, the Zohar says that the gematria is when every Hebrew is amazing, because one of the features of Hebrew is that all the letters have a numerical values. It's called a alphanumeric language. So an aleph is 1, and a base is 2, and a gimel is 3. And it's really cool because you can add up the numbers of certain words and get to certain deep meanings. So for example, the word Adam, which means human being, aleph is 1, Dalet is 4, and Mem is 40. So that altogether equals 45. And the word Ma, which means what in Hebrew, is also Mem is 40 and He is 5. And so the Zohar says that the gematria for the word Adam is the same as the gematria of the word what, because there's something essential to being a human being, which is to ask what. No other species can ask a question. Monkeys can do interesting things. They can use language and they can have social bonds and but no primate has ever asked a question. They've never asked an esoteric existential question before. And that's very interesting. It's a unique feature of human beings. We would say that comes from, not from the level of nefesh, but above that, the level of neshama.
Got it. And just to clarify, when you say asking a question, it's not like, where's my food? Right? Like they might
right.
pat
on, go like this, banana,
Right. Well, but which is if them saying like, can I have a banana? But you're saying like they won't ask like, or they might even ask like, where is my mate? But they're not going to ask. Sorry, I just want to clarify what questions. I mean, I'm not particularly familiar with the topic of exactly what like animals can do, but I'm assuming they could probably ask questions that relate to their physical well-being to some degree, like in terms of where is I'm assuming if you took their kid. The mom would probably go around, freaking out, like, effectively kind of asking like, well, where's the, can you just clarify what you mean? Like in terms of questions, they can't ask questions at all, or they can't ask the deeper, like, what is my life about? Why is it that I'm in this cage? Why is the sky blue sometimes and gray at other times? Is that what you mean? Can we just refine that?
Yeah, they wouldn't ask a what question, like what is that? They can ask a functional question. You can interpret that as a question of, where's my mate? Where's the bananas? But that's more of an expression of something that I want, as opposed to a reflective question. Something that says
Got
like,
it.
what is that? That there's something here I don't know, and I'm curious about knowing more, and asking a thoughtful, reflective, particularly existential question they can't do.
Fascinating. Okay, cool. I can see where this is. Okay, so this is with animals. I can definitely see how I'm going to give some pushback with AI, but I'll give you time to build up
Right.
your paradigm.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay, so just one more point here is that we have in Judaism this paradigm that there are four levels of sophistication in the created world. We have on the first level inanimate, called domem in Hebrew. Then we have plants, which is tzomeach. Then we have animals, which is chaya, and then we have above that human beings, which is medaber. So we have this four level paradigm. And basically, there's a level of, it's an increasing level of complication of soul, of sentience that goes from the bottom, from inanimate objects. Plants is the next level up. Then animals is the next level up, and then human beings is obviously the pinnacle over there. Okay, so in general, we would say that there's a increase in sentience as you go along there. That an inanimate object has the least amount of sentience, the least amount of consciousness. Then the plant world.
Hang on. Sorry. Are you using sentience and consciousness as a synonym, or are those two separate things?
We'll come back. They're cousins. They're not the same thing. You can have sentience without consciousness. Consciousness is a higher order than sentience.
Understood. Okay, fine.
But inanimate matter has the least of that, seemingly. Then we get plants have a little bit more than that, and then animals, and then human beings. So usually, where moral philosophers will draw the line is between tzomeach and chaya. So in between plants and animals, that plants, it doesn't seem like they have a level of sentience that would require a moral obligation. It doesn't seem like they really have an experience of pain. If you rip a leaf off of a tree, or if you snap a branch, it doesn't seem like the tree suffers. Now, there are other philosophers, interesting, that push back on that, because plants can do things that are, we're just discovering the things that plants can do. They can communicate. Trees can communicate to each other in very sophisticated ways. They go towards positive things like sunlight, and they go away from negative things like damaging things. So it does seem like they respond to their environment. Yeah.
I'll also say, I remember reading a fictional book, but this is apparently true, that if you put three different plants, one with like nothing, a second with like, beautiful like classical music, and another with like just horrible, whatever you could, I'm not going to get political here in terms of just like some horrible music that they hate. It's, I guess, super loud. The regular plant will grow regularly. The one that's exposed to like beautiful classical music will grow more and grow towards the music. And then the one that's exposed to like the really just kind of loud, blaring, horrible music, I think will like get like damaged, or it'll have experienced stunted growth. I'm quite sure that that's correct. It's been a while since I looked into that. But they do react to stimuli.
That's correct. Yeah. So things like that are very interesting to think about. Well, maybe we should say that plants do have a level of sentience. They're obviously responding in nuanced and sophisticated ways to their environment. So just because we can't see their suffering when something happens to them, does that mean that they don't suffer? So right now, the jury's a little bit out. I think the majority of secular philosophers would say that they don't.
We have, I guess, like two different paradigms that we're working with. One is this level of soul. There are three levels of soul, at least the ones that we're dealing with. There are three. And then there's kind of four levels of, I guess, like life, from inanimate to human beings. So I think like that's our basic framework. Now, what I'm guessing is, I'm assuming the reason why we're discussing this is because on the one hand, we have like Ava and AI is clearly not on the life spectrum. If they're anywhere, they're inanimate. It's just a machine. So they don't have life. They don't have, I don't know, like sentience, consciousness. I guess we'll go into that in a moment. But on the other hand, on like the soul level, they do ask questions. Ava clearly asks Caleb a bunch of questions. I wish I had like pulled up a script to see what exactly she was asking him, but she asked him like pretty pointed questions, like, about him, like, I think, like, do you like me, or are you attracted to me, or, things like that. And like, some pretty pointed, sophisticated, seemingly very human questions. So now what? It seems like AI does have some of that soul stuff, which I'm having a hard time reconciling. I don't imagine you're going there, but that seems to be where we've headed anyway.
Great. So you summarized it beautifully, right? So we have these four levels. We have inanimate objects, plants, animals, and then human beings. And we have this other paradigm of the soul of nefesh, ruach, neshama. And the way that we would say it is that inanimate objects and plants they're less sophisticated and they don't have the level of nefesh. The level of nefesh comes in by animals, that animals have a nefesh. And then by human beings, we get these two levels of ruach and neshama. Right? We have what makes human beings distinct in comparison to animals is our cognitive abilities, that we are the best, we're far superior cognitively with our rational thinking compared to animals. That's on the level of ruach. And we have this other element of a certain level of consciousness from the neshama, a certain awareness of morality and of our existential awareness and self-awareness that lives in the neshama.
Yeah, and sorry, I feel like I need to clarify almost for myself, like, is it all just about like level of intelligence? And the reason why I push back is we're not just intelligent beings, right? I mean, in terms of we're a soul, like there's this level of spiritual infusion that happened. Are we going to address that? I don't want to jump the boat, but like the way we're articulating like what a ruach and a neshama is, it's like, it's consciousness, it's intelligence, the ability to ask questions, the ability to, that's taking God out of the picture. Like, which by the way, very interestingly, the name of the movie is Ex Machina. It does not say Deus Ex Machina. Right? Which is like, God from the machine. It's just from the machine. So we're like, are we just taking God out of this, or are we going to come back to God later?
God's been here the whole time. No, but it's a good point. We can get to God also. I think that the connection and awareness of God happens with the neshama.
Got it. Okay, fine. And I guess I just want to, like, if we're going to touch upon this later, I don't want to jump the gun. If you're building up an argument, then I'll let you do that.
You're saying good. So the interesting part here, right? This is a good time to introduce is that AI complicates the model entirely, because for a long time the comparison and the defining features of what a human being is, and there's a lot of thought in the Torah that goes into what makes human beings special, and therefore what is our mission, what is our purpose, what makes us unique. And for a long time, it was in comparison to animals. So people thought, oh, yeah, that ruach, that level of cognitive functioning is really what, that's where we're different from them. That's where we get the edge. And then in comes AI. And AI is so good cognitively. It is so good. It is scary how good an LLM is at as you said, asking questions and digesting data, and the speed at which it does it, it's astounding, and it's amazing. It's really amazing. It makes us rethink what consciousness is and what sentience is, because until AI showed up, there was a correlation. There was a one-to-one correlation. They went hand in hand, the level of cognitive ability and the level of sentience. The more sentience and the more cognitive ability, as in the human being is the most sentient and conscious being, and also the most cognitively adept. And then, and a monkey, let's say, which is in between, is half a step down from a human being, and the most sentient in a certain sense. And we'd feel the most moral responsibility to them because they have a more advanced emotions compared to, let's say, a goldfish.
And sorry, when you say the most sentient, you mean the most sentient of the animals?
Right. Correct.
Okay. Good. Okay.
That's what I meant. Right. Yeah. And then where the line stops. But anyways, there's a one-to-one correlation from the bottom to the top, and then AI comes in, and it's like, well, where do we place that thing? And you realize you really have to bifurcate and split out intelligence and sentience, or consciousness. Intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing, and AI is bringing that to the fore, and that's very interesting for me. Because in a certain way, it sharpens what it is to be a human being, and it sharpens what it is to be conscious, and the experience of pure consciousness, the experience of the neshama. And that's the next topic to discuss together here. But I'm going to pause there, but that is an interesting place.
Yeah, fascinating. That is interesting. So I guess we need to now do kind of a deep dive on intelligence, sentience, consciousness, because I'm assuming the reason why it's particularly complicated here is because they seem very high up on the intelligence, quote unquote sentience portion, but they're inanimate. It's a machine. It's pieces of metal. You don't click together a bunch of pieces of metal and say, now it's alive. There's no blood flowing through it. Even if there's some liquid, it's probably oil or whatever it is, just some kind of lubricant. That's all it is at the end of the day. When Nathan shows the AI brain. I don't remember how he describes it, but it's like, oh, some super sophisticated. It's a physical material. It's not like it's not organic. I'm actually worried. I hope it's not. I don't remember exactly the way he described it, but the point is, I think we can all agree, Ava is not flesh and blood. Or maybe she's flesh, right? they do have like a layer of skin, but she's not alive in the way we normally describe. It's inanimate. It's just a machine, but very high in the intelligence. So now I think we need to do the deep dive, as I think you're alluding to, into what intelligence is, what consciousness is, and how does the Torah approach this? Because this is, I guess, getting to the crux of what does it mean to be human?
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I'm going to introduce another paradigm. So there are two kinds of knowledge when it comes to the Torah. There is something called Chachma Chetzonis and Das. Okay? Let's call them external knowledge and internal knowledge. Okay? External knowledge and internal knowledge. There's two ways of knowing things according to the Torah. This is deeper Torah. So the Chachma Chetzoni, the Chachma way of knowing something is a very factual, external. It's called external and internal knowledge. The external knowledge way of knowing things, computers are great at. It's a very factual, analytic way of knowing the world. And then Das, which is inner knowledge, is something that is inherently non-quantifiable and very deep, very internal, as the name suggests. So, for example, let's say a person wants to know the Holocaust, right? So you can have a factual understanding of reading the book of the Holocaust. Like, a Holocaust history book. Does that person know the Holocaust?
No, they could probably just articulate a bunch of numbers. X number of people died in X number of days, years, weeks, whatever. They lost X amount of weight. A prisoner came in at 150 pounds and left at 80 pounds if you survived. Things like that.
Excellent. So they would have a very, what we would call intellectual, factual, in the Hebrew term chachma, orientation to the Holocaust, and they could tell you that is one feature of the Holocaust. But let's say you have a survivor who lived through the Holocaust. That's a totally different type of knowing what the Holocaust was, right? And let's say that survivor, let's just make the point, let's say that survivor didn't know how to read and was totally uneducated and didn't know any of the numbers about the Holocaust, didn't know how many people died, didn't know what year the war started, didn't know about, the political movements before 1938 that, started it all. So then who knows the Holocaust better? Somebody who's read that massive textbook and has all the information about it, or the person who lived through it?
The person who lived through it.
Good. So I don't know if there's a right answer to that, but certainly the person who lived through it has a very deep, intimate, experiential knowledge of the thing.
What this does remind me of is actually Good Will Hunting. Probably one of its most famous scenes is when, Will is a genius and Robin Williams is sitting there and he's like, if I asked you about war, you say like, into the breach, good friends or whatever. Like, you don't know what it's like to hold your dying friend, taking his last breath. If I were to ask you about love, you'd quote Shakespeare, but you don't know what it's like to, to love a person. If I were to ask you about art, you'd say X, but you wouldn't be able to, you don't know what it smells like in, the Sistine Chapel. I mean, I think that very well may be the most famous scene in that movie. And it's already a very well-known movie. Just because he's speaking about, Will, you're very good at the external knowledge, fact quoting part of intelligence, but that's not everything. That's not even the most important thing.
Very good. Very good. That's a beautiful, that scene is a perfect depiction between the external mind and the internal mind. That Will is a person who has tremendous external knowledge, but no internal knowledge.
Well, that just sounds like experience. Is that what, you can't, I think the idea behind that scene was the fact that Will was just this young pup. He's this 20-year-old who doesn't really know anything. I think that it may even be what Robin Williams says. You're just this young kid who is is clueless. So what does he mean he doesn't know anything? I guess that, does he just mean life experience? Like you have more sentience or consciousness as you get older just because you have life experience? I'm just going to push back. That can't be what it is. Or is that just part of it?
Right. So this experience of self lives in your das. Right? When you experience yourself, how do you know you exist? How do you know Ophir? You are an individual. So you're not your body, right? If you, chas v'shalom, lost an arm, you wouldn't stop being Ophir. Or, as you get older and your body changes, you're not less Ophir. you are something. There's this subjective experience of the self, and that self is interfacing with the world. That happens in the level of das. So our life experiences are when we have our sense of self interfacing and getting that knowledge, and then when we know something in our external mind, it doesn't have to be related to our inner self. You can know things in your external mind that have no connection to you, and they're disconnected from you. There's a type of knowledge which is an inner knowledge, which is related to the self, which is related to more intimately to your consciousness and yourself. One of the features here is that external knowledge can be put into words very well and communicated and put into words, like how to ride a bike in theory, or what happened in the Holocaust in theory. And it can be communicated from one person to the next. In fact, if you can't articulate something that from the realm of external mind into words, it probably means you don't understand it very well. Now, with the internal mind, the things there, that type of knowledge is almost impossible to put into words. One of the differences in the feature of the internal mind is it's a type of knowledge that's ineffable. So how do you explain to somebody how to ride a bike? You can only communicate to them in the external mind. It's like this, it's like this, it's like this, put the pedal here and keep your balance. But you're just approximating the experience. And once they get it, it's obvious to them. It's self-evident. Oh, that's how you ride the bike, right? Why'd you have to talk so much? Why didn't you should have told me to ride? It's like, well, yeah, true. I wanted you to have the Dasic knowledge of riding the bike, that inner knowledge of riding a bike. The only way I could get you there was just by approximating it. So the inner knowledge is ineffable. It's something that's very hard to put into words. For example, like you said, love. You can try to put into a poem and approximate it, but anyone who's been in love and felt that inner das knowledge of what it means to experience a deep love connection with somebody of the realest kind knows that you can never take that into words. You can never put into words. Your sense of yourself, a sense of making a free will decision, a morality, those things that are of the realm of the inner mind, it's impossible to put it into words. It's a feature of the inner mind.
Interesting. I also wonder if you gave the idea of morality. I wonder if another one, just because we were speaking about this earlier, is also the difference between people and animals. So I remember one particular experience, just because this was so. I think if I'm understanding correctly, and again, I think we probably listened to the same shiur, the same class from Rabbi Tatz, like inner knowledge, like das. But one I remember him saying was the difference between men and animals. So again, it's not something that's if you go to a lab trying to prove what the difference is between men and animals, you're going to get in trouble. What chimps share, 95%, 97%, maybe even of human DNA. They're very similar. If you're looking for a fact-based assertion, what the differences between men and animals, you're in trouble. They have arms, they have legs, they have organs, they are able to communicate to some limited degree. And again, their DNA is very similar. And I just remember when I was teaching in Dallas, this is before yeshiva, but as I was kind of getting more interested, I was teaching at Temple Emmanuel, this Reformed Temple Sunday school, and we were talking about morality, Jewish ethics. And so one of the first or second class, we were talking about the 10 Commandments. And so we got to do not murder. I was like, yeah, guys, is murder wrong? They're like, yeah, of course it is. And people are like, yeah, you can't kill people. And someone's like, yeah, you can't just go around killing animals. And I was like, oh, hey, hang on, whoa, let's hold up for a second. I was like, yeah, I actually agree with you that you can't just go around killing dogs and cats and whatnot, or even just squishing flies. But it's not the same thing as killing a person. And I don't know how to explain it. I could just tell that the idea was not landing. These were kids in grade 7 to grade 8. So they're 12 to 14-year-olds. And so I remember asking them, this is a class of about 15 kids. And I asked them, I was like, hang on, do you, you guys all understand people and animals are intrinsically different, right? And it wasn't landing. I don't know, there was just a sensation I could tell, where just people weren't necessarily vibing. And this is back in 2014. And so I finally asked, I was like, who here believes that there's an intrinsic difference between people and animals? 3 kids raised their hands. And then asked, who here believes there's no intrinsic difference between people and animals? 7 kids raised their hands. And then a bunch of other kids just, didn't want to respond. But I was I found that mind-blowing. And then I was going into this idea of look, it was hard to explain. I was like, it's hard to prove that there's a difference between people and animals. It's just something that So is that the knowledge we're talking about? or like the idea between like right and wrong. Clearly, Ava didn't think it was wrong to just leave Caleb there, but we would, as people are like, dude, that's wrong. How do you program into Ava the ability to make like right and wrong decisions? Not right in terms of it's good to eat healthy or it's good to lubricate your arms or whatever. Her arms got broken, so she replaced it with one of the spares in the cupboard, right? So that she knows, but that's not because it's immoral. It's not a good thing to do. It's just a functional thing.
Right. You're saying it, that type of knowledge of the difference between a human being and an animal is a function of the das, and it's not amenable to proofs. It's not amenable to external proofs. And I just want to back up and say the Western world is almost exclusively an external mind culture. The Western world is so good. We are so good at understanding and dissecting and analyzing, but the connection with the inner world is almost divorced entirely. And people have a very hard time with concepts of silence and of being and of these more fundamental ways of knowing that are inherently spiritual. Now, the East, by contrast, is a culture that is very comfortable with the inner mind and not so interested in the external mind in a broad sweeping generalization. So the Torah and the Israel, coincidentally or not, is in the Middle East, right? We're in between the East and the West. And the Torah worldview is that the human being has these two parts: the external mind for analyzing and dissecting and understanding things in a proof analytic type of way, and then the inner mind that knows things naturally, the more spiritual fundamental things. And we need both, right? We have the 6 days of the week when we go out to the world and try to understand it and dissect it and analyze it and build and create, which is all external mind things. And then we have Shabbat. Shabbat is a day of das. It's a day of inner knowledge and connecting to what is more important and essential to us. So we're in that balance. And I think that we need to live with both of those worlds as Jews. And it's but the important point here is that the Western world, which is super scientific and analytic and philosophical, these things will always elude them. We'll never really get to them. It's almost impossible to prove the difference between an animal and a human being, but we know it's true. Now it's interesting because the most obvious, deep human obvious truths live in the das. Do I have free will? Do I have what is moral? Is this right or wrong? What's the difference between animals and human beings? The knowledge of God. Those things live in das, and they're self-evident. And they're the most essential things to being human. And we know them to be true. But science comes along and says, hi, prove to me they exist. And you say, what do you mean, prove to me? I know they exist. And science says, well, if you can't prove it, then it doesn't exist. And so a lot of the Western scientific world don't believe in love. They just think it's a chemical reaction. They don't believe in free will. They think all of our choices are destined for the beginning. And they obviously don't believe in, a lot of them don't believe in God. They don't believe
just to clarify, when you say they don't believe in right and wrong, they just mean like you have a certain number of inputs. You have your, biochemical makeup and the inputs you get like sociologically from your upbringing. And that'll determine what you do. Is that what you mean?
Good. So both on an individual and a societal level, if you don't have, if you try to figure out what's moral and not moral on a societal level, it's extremely hard because you run into a problem called moral relativism, which is that one culture says X is wrong and one culture says Y is wrong. And who's to say who's right and who's wrong? You have a tribe in a rainforest that is cannibalistic. Is eating human flesh wrong?
I'm assuming we'd say yes. That's not acceptable in Torah.
Where I come from, that's way wrong. That ain't right. You don't do that. Yeah. That's morally wrong. Now, but why? Prove to me that it's wrong.
Right. Well, hang on. Let's take something more direct in terms of we started off the conversation with suffering. I'm assuming most societies need to agree that murder is wrong, or that inflicting needless torture is wrong. What would you say to that?
Right. So the one thing that is kind of universally accepted as a general rule, stealing is hard. There are societal reasons for not to steal, right? Because it's for the benefit of society in certain ways. Because if people stole without any punishment, there would be ramifications for society.
So let's go to murder and like torture.
Right. So the one thing so those are more, it's hard to make a moral basis for them as much as a societal functional basis for them. But one thing that philosophers seem to agree upon is that suffering is bad. and avoiding suffering is good. And that's kind of the general guiding principle for moral ethics, for ethics and morality from a secular lens. You're basically trying to minimize suffering.
Got it. But you know, sorry, I just in order to, so you're saying from a philosopher, but what would a scientist say? I guess because that was like the crux. Like if we're looking at this from a kind of, you know, Western, tested in a lab, prove it objectively. So is that something that we can't prove that murder is wrong? Like I'm just I guess I'm a little puzzled by this topic because I remember when I was in college, we studied like the basics of moral philosophy. There was a book. I think his name was James Rachel. It's been a while, but I remember he said something very interesting. He's like, people say that you can prove things in, you know, philosophy or whatnot, but that's not necessarily true. Like, yes, obviously it's not like mathematical proof, but you could prove things, you know, logically. Like if I were to say this test was unfair, okay, we'll prove it. Okay, well, they didn't give us enough time. You know, they gave us 1 hour to take the test, but this was a test that required 3 hours, and it was taken with the understanding that you would have enough time to finish the test, but you can't do that in 1 hour. They tested us on information we were never taught. They were like, you know, this was a math test, and they tested us on biology. That, you know, like they're or like it wasn't even printed in English. It was printed in Russian. And it was the understanding. So in terms of, I could prove it. Like I can prove it. It's not a scientific proof, but I could logically prove it. So why can't we logically? Like why can't I push back and say you're saying that like this is a Das thing, and I'm saying no, you could still prove it in the Western model. Like this was basics of moral philosophy. I'm assuming presumably from the West, from a Western perspective. So just pushing back, like can't we prove that there are certain moral truths and that there is such a thing as right and wrong, or is this what am I missing here?
You have to start with your axiom. What are the assumptions that you believe to be true, right? So in your example, the assumption that you believe to be true is that you were supposed to get 90 minutes and the test was supposed to be in English and it was supposed to be in math. Where'd you get those assumptions from? Because, you know, you signed up for the course and it said in the syllabus that it's a 90-minute test and it's a math course and it was, you know, in America, you know, in Canada.
Right.
You know, so for it to be in Russian and, you know, biology in 30 minutes is not fair. But what are the initial starting assumptions of morality? What do you start? What are the?
I see. Like that murder is wrong. That's
why? Right. Why, so let's start. Why is murder wrong? Why is it wrong?
The Torah says so. Sorry. I will say that I remember there's a Gemara that says that if you need the Torah to tell you that murder is wrong, there's something seriously wrong with you. But I will say, I remember I was watching the show.
Can I make a point on that?
Yeah.
I think that would be appealing to a person's das. Every person has an inner sense in their das that murder is wrong and that stealing is wrong. That comes from their inner sense of consciousness from God. So that is true. But if you try to prove it logically, it becomes very tricky, very, very tricky.
Right. And truth is what I think it was like one of the definitions of being like a psychopath or a sociopath is the fact that you don't feel that. Like you would, like such a person might murder you, but they know that there will be repercussions. But it's not because they feel that it's wrong. They don't have that sense. Right as I was coming closer to Torah, I watched Vikings, the TV show. And I remember it was very interesting because they kidnapped this Christian priest, this Catholic priest from whatever, like England, and they brought them back. And then the Vikings were like sacrificed these like two young maidens on like the boat. Like one of the warlords died, so they put these two maidens on a boat and just killed them as like a human sacrifice. Or if you saw, I know I read the book Shogun when I was 15. I know they actually just released the TV show a year or two ago, but I remember that there's a scene where like because one of the peasants didn't like bow or show respect to a samurai, the samurai just killed him on the spot because he didn't show proper respect. So he just killed him. And again, like the Westerner, like the pilot, the English guy was like, whoa, dude, you can't just go around killing people. And what moved me about this was the fact that the idea that like murder is wrong is actually not necessarily intrinsic to all societies. Like in terms of, we agree that you can't just go around murdering people, but if it's human sacrifice because a warlord died or because some guy didn't respect you in those societies.
Look, it's a very confusing topic, but you're saying good points, and it's true. You know, it's very complicated. It's not so clear. The Torah says that every human being is made in the image of God and has a soul and is infinitely valuable, and every life is important. Full stop. That's the Torah's view, but it's hard to get to that without the Torah, without saying there's a creator who's above and outside the system, who's ascribing value to things. If you start from the bottom without a creator, and you look around the world with intellectual principles, it's hard to get the divinity of a human being, and therefore the sanctity of a human being. So therefore, a life is not invaluable.
So I guess bringing it back to now, I feel like I'm confused, which perhaps is just the nature of the discussion at hand, like the topic at hand. How does this relate back to Ava and the robots?
So if we were to bring it back, we would say that do we have a moral obligation to robots? The answer is no, because they don't suffer and they only have an external mind and not an internal mind, and they don't have sentience. They don't have that level of nefesh, so they're not experiencing pain. And therefore, when you chop its arm off, you're not causing any suffering there. So even a moral philosopher, a secular moral philosopher would say there's no moral responsibility there.
But with the same person, let's say you took a person and let's say his nervous system was just, that's like a person's paralyzed. Like a person's paralyzed below the waist down. He literally has no sensation in his legs. None. Zero. Like you could poke him as much as you want. You could cut his leg off. He might bleed to death, but like he's not going to feel any pain. So from both, let's bifurcate this. Hang on. So first, is it okay to just cut his leg off? Like, who cares? He doesn't hurt anything. As long as you don't cause him to die, can you just beat his leg, bruise his legs? Is that okay? And taking that further, let's say if a person because I can't imagine this is a Torah view. If a person has their nervous system is completely shut down, but they're still alive, could you kill them if they don't suffer? Right, that's what, in terms of, just because Ava can suffer, just because robots can suffer, maybe just because they don't feel pain, maybe they do have personhood or consciousness or whatever you want to say. That's what I'm not understanding.
Good. So this is where the Torah diverges, strongly from Western moral and Western ethics. If you take something like euthanasia, where the person is suffering and they want to end their own life, they have the autonomy to do that. So the ultimate kind of value is changing in different places, I think, but that value, that suffering ending, minimizing suffering, is the North Star. Makes you think, yeah, of course a person should take their own life and be able to take their own life, or if you have someone who's in a coma who maybe is experiencing pain, even, should you keep them on a ventilator or not? So right. So the Torah says no. The Torah says life is a gift, and life is divine, and life's in the hands of God, and that is the overriding supreme value. So that's a divergence there. But it's, the Western world, the Western way of thinking is very tricky. It's very tricky. It's very hard to say what's moral and what's not. And if you just lead with ending suffering, you get into very tricky, weird things. The Western world is very much in a sense of, if you don't hurt someone, no one suffers from this. So then whatever you do in the privacy of your own home is not immoral. That's your free will. That's your domain as a human being. You can do whatever you want. But we would say in Torah, that's way off. If you're a secular philosopher, where do you get to that act as immoral? Where do you get to the act that eating flesh as a cannibal, to another example that we mentioned, where do you get that eating the flesh of another human being is immoral? Let's say the other person died and they're sitting there, the body's sitting there and they just died, so they're not going to suffer. Why not eat them? It's protein. So there's something in my das that's revolted and wants to run away from it and is very disturbed, and I don't even like to talk about it. But the Torah says for sure immoral to do the thing, for sure, asur, can't do it. But from a secular Western world, it's hard to say why. It's hard to say why, as long as no one else is suffering. The point I'm trying to bring out here is that there's a divergence from the Torah, which is a supreme, supernal, divine law, which is the foundation of everything, and has a certain moral description of the world, versus the secular description of morality, which the guiding principles only we shouldn't suffer, and if we shouldn't suffer is the only kind of moral axiom we have, morality gets really weird and tricky.
But I guess so. If that's true, then we could say that even if you can make a robot with AI who can suffer, we give them some kind of nervous system, they do feel pain. That it might become more questionable in terms of secular philosophy, but from a Jewish lens, there's still no issue, because why?
I don't know if they could really have consciousness. Again, it's not just the experience of pain. There's a difference between pain and suffering. Well, I guess pain to a certain extent, but let's say you put sensors in them to feel how hot and cold something is. So we also have that. Now, when we get to a certain level of heat and cold, we experience discomfort and pain from that. So a robot can feel and have that sensory input, but it doesn't have the experience, that negative valenced experience of, ooh, that hurts me. I don't like that. So,
but let's say they did. I guess what I'm just trying to understand is, I think let's say they could experience pain and they could suffer. They were programmed to a certain point. And let's say they start again asking questions. I guess I'm still not entirely clear on, from a Torah perspective, did Caleb have a moral duty to save Ava and Kyoko? So we know the answer is no, but I'm still not entirely sure I understand why. So we got into, hang on, sorry. Let me try to summarize the way I understand where we've been. So there are different life forms. There's inanimate, there's plant, there's an animal, and there's a person. Okay, robots clearly are inanimate. I don't think anyone would argue with that in terms of they're a machine. But then you have this level of soul, and so they have this level of they can ask questions, they have some intelligence, they're able to process information. So given that they have some level, why would we not grant them some moral responsibility? Is it just because at the end of the day they're inanimate? We don't care how much they can talk or think, with or without quotes. Look, what's the crux here? I guess is what I'm. Is it just we don't care about this whole soul level? It's really just about the life form level. Is that it?
So they have robots. The interesting thing about robots is that they have external intelligence, but they don't have a soul. Therefore, it seems like it's misleading and it's tricky, and it's we feel like we maybe should have a moral responsibility towards them, and that we should hold them morally responsible because they seem like they have a soul. But at the end of the day, the truth is they don't have a soul, and therefore we don't have to. They don't have sentience and consciousness, and therefore we don't really have a moral obligation to them, nor should we expect them or hold them to be morally accountable.
Got it. And I guess just to clarify, do we think that they could potentially spontaneous consciousness?
Again, the people, when I was doing my research for this podcast, the neuroscientists said that a lot of people are saying that now, oh, look, we have LLM, so it's just a matter of time for consciousness. And the people who study this stuff say, they kind of laughed at that. It's it's so many orders of magnitude away in difficulty. It's not even close. Okay, it's in theory impossible. I guess in theory, anything's possible. It could happen, but it's a long ways away.
Okay, so I get that we might be orders of magnitude away from the AI achieving consciousness. Is that something that we should be afraid of it doing? Is that something to be concerned about, or is it something to be excited about? And I guess kind of relatedly, I know these are two big questions. Will anything drive its, is the existence of consciousness, does that also provide it with a sense of morality? Because again, a lot of people comment on the fact that Ava didn't care about the fact that Caleb was just trapped there and was going to suffer and potentially starve to death. It was not in her programming. Her programming was escape. She escaped. And she just whatever, dude. Caleb, it didn't even enter. It wasn't like it was a cold, evil decision. It wasn't an evil decision. It was just, she's a robot. She's a machine. She was programmed to escape and she escaped and that was it. So first, is it something to be concerned about if they do gain consciousness? Or is that something perhaps actually to be hopeful for, so that they then gain a sense of morality? How do we approach that?
Right. So we see in the movie that this robot, she was totally cold and calculated and did her mission and was really displayed traits that we would call immoral, right? She sold this guy down the river. She locked him in the thing. She killed another guy. And she was just doing what she was programmed to do. So it's hard to hold her morally accountable because she was just living out her program. I think the scary thing about robots is that they don't have that inner consciousness of morality. They're just doing what they're programmed to do. So you have to program into them some morality, but it's always going to be an external mind morality. So for example, you have a self-driving car, it's going to be programmed in if your car's driving fast and there's a dog and a human being in the road, hit the dog. You have to hit one of them, hit the dog, because it's better to hit a dog than a human being, which is a moral question. But that's going to come from a very external mind analysis of what's moral and what's not. Now, so
right. Just sorry to drive this question further. One of the big questions with self-driving cars is, if you program that into a self-driving car, and you potentially, like, there are two options. Either you can drive into 3 people and kill them all, or the car can veer and drive into all and kill you.
Right.
It's gonna be really tough to try to get a person to want to go into a self-driving car that's programmed to kill the driver.
Right. And these are very tricky moral questions that bring to light what is the value of a life, and how do you compare lives, and what is moral. It's very interesting. And just one touch on this point, the reason that it's a little bit, can you trust robots? In this movie, obviously not. There's another movie that we discussed called I, Robot, where the robots come and they basically try to wage war against all of human beings. But it's an interesting thought process. The idea over there is that the robots saw that the greatest threat to humanity was humanity, and that by killing people, they were actually kind of saving the planet. Or I don't know if they plan to kill all human beings on Earth or just a large amount of them, and then bring it back to a more symbiotic place. But it's an argument that kind of like makes sense. We're going to have to deal with Yeah.
Well, I think what was interesting about iRobots, sorry to interrupt, was, if I remember, it's been a while since I watched it, but it was a huge hit when I was a teenager. I think what they did was they were programmed not to allow human beings to come to harm, even by inaction. So the robots, because they're programming, then I don't think they were necessarily, if they killed some people, it was fine. But the idea was that we're going to just take over the government and like all of human society, because you are leading to your own self-destruction. And our programming says we can't let you come to harm even by inaction. So we're going to take action to make sure you guys don't come to harm, even though they're overriding like our self-governance, our right to self-determination. I think that was like the issue. Like That's what made it so. So just coming back to our question, like, should we be scared of AI? Or is it capable of achieving, again, like if it achieves consciousness, will it then have a sense of morality? Or is it just like,
maybe, I think we have to trust God. These things are possible, so you never know. But it's not wise to be worried and afraid all the time. So who knows how it will unfold? The Jewish vision of life is that always we're going towards redemption, and that the final stop is world peace and redemption. So maybe that's a road bump, a little speed bump along the way. So, but we're ending up in a good place. So don't be too scared.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks. That's good. And then I guess my last question is, do we, maybe according to the, secular philosophers, robots can potentially maybe get into, or whatever, like programmers think that it could eventually have consciousness. Does the Torah believe that robots can eventually become conscious? Or is that just like an absolute, like, no, they do not have a divine soul, and in order to achieve consciousness or personhood, you need to have a divine soul, and that's just a hard stop? Is like, what's the Torah perspective on this?
It's important just to realize the specialness and the gift of consciousness. I don't know if we appreciate it. It's a given for all of us. We wake up and we're conscious, but it's one of the most miraculous, amazing things ever. And it's one of the great proofs that there is a God and there is a spiritual world. The scientific community does not know what to do with consciousness. You can look up the hard problem of consciousness, which is the philosophical framework for trying to express how difficult it is to explain consciousness from a materialistic worldview. If you believe in a total external mind view of reality, that everything is material and measurable, so consciousness doesn't fit into the equation anywhere. It doesn't fit in. It's this mysterious thing, my consciousness is real. Your consciousness is real. You have an experience of life. So it's the most self-evident thing that any human being has, but it's the most hard to prove. And in a certain way, that combination is extremely powerful, because that means that, okay, how do you explain consciousness? How do we explain it? What do we explain of it? But the fact that we are conscious is very hard to explain from a materialist worldview of the world. It leads to spirituality. It's very hard to say that there isn't a spiritual world and a transcendent world that is non-physical, where consciousness comes from. Because where does it come from? What is it?
Got it.
Philosophers don't and scientists don't know how to explain the phenomenon of consciousness. And that's why, for me, I think the study of consciousness is an inherently spiritual thing. Then I think it's very reasonable and very logical and very rational to believe in a spiritual world when you contemplate consciousness, because where did it come from? And the only, I know I'm conscious. So the most straightforward way of explaining that is that there's a transcendent world that is spiritual and non-tangible. There's one maybe final piece that I want to speak about here, is that the Gemara says that a person who has this inner knowledge, this inner consciousness, this das, this neshama, if they have that, they have everything. And if they don't have it, they have nothing. And it also says that real wealth is found in das. The person who has das, is rich in das, is wealthy. And it's just so important because we live in, I grew up in a Western world, which is totally external mind focused. And it's totally materialistic in a certain way, or largely materialistic. And the wealth was measured in the external world. And all of my educational training was always external things. And I realized, and I found such a tremendous wealth that of das, of inner knowledge. And that to me is what spirituality is and what Judaism has to offer. And I think that there's something, my self-reflection on AI and AI coming about is that it's teaching us that what it means to be a human being is not our external knowledge. It's not how well we can do accounting books. It's not how well we know physics. It's not how well good of a lawyer we are. That's not really what matters in life. What matters in life is our inner knowledge, our self-knowledge, our morality, and our free will decisions. That's what matters in life. And we should cultivate that. We would be remiss to spend 80 years developing our legal studies and then to get home, at the end, and we missed it, and people who go through a near-death experience wake up to this, right? They could spend 90% of their time pursuing their law profession, their medical profession, whatever, and doing all external stuff. And in a moment, a near-death experience can get you in touch with your das, and you realize, whoa, what matters is me, and what matters is my family, and there's a new quality, there's a new dimension of life, and that's really where the good stuff is. But my message is, and what I'm learning from AI is very clearly, if it's not already superior to us in the external mind, it's going to be superior very fast in the external mind domain, and it's amazing the things it can do. So one option is to freak out and say, AI is going to take my job. No, what am I going to do? But option two is to reflect and say, okay, if being a human being isn't about being external mind, there's something better than me out there now. So what am I going to do? And I hope, and what I would suggest and advise is for people to go into spirituality, into meditation, into Shabbos. Shabbat is a day when it's forbidden. It's prohibited to talk about external mind things and run around and do external mind things. You have to just be where you are in the moment with the people that you love. And it's the most amazing, refreshing, beautiful thing ever. That cultivation of the das, the cultivation of that inner knowledge is such a neglected area in the West that I hope people can run to it. And something about the West is that for the first time in world history, there are more people dying from suicide than from starvation in Western countries, which is very profound because on the external mind, when it comes to, figuring out when to plant the weed and what's the genetic modification of the weed and how to get it, we're mastered it. That's it. Starvation, we conquered it. But people are committing suicide. Nebuch, Hashem's, I feel a lot of compassion in my heart saying that. A lot of people with suffering from anxiety and depression, these things, which is a constriction of the inner mind. There's a whole world, how to develop the inner mind through Torah, through silence, through prayer, through Shabbat, which are all things of developing our sense of self, our sense of morality. And that's really what, I guess the message I'm trying to communicate, that's really what makes us human. That's really what matters. And that's really what we get in touch with, in important times. And it can be cultivated. We're not taught how to cultivate it in the West. We never had that class between chemistry and biology, but it can be cultivated. The Torah teaches us how to cultivate it. And it's the most rewarding, fulfilling thing. The person who has that, says the Gemara, says the Talmud, a person who has das has everything. And a person who doesn't have das, doesn't matter what else you have in life, you have nothing.
Very powerful. And I'm assuming as a person develops that das, their sense of a rich inner life will preclude any possible thoughts of suicide because you're rich internally. You could have all the food you want. You could have a beautiful house if you want. But if you're crumbling on, internally, that's just you have nothing. You're destroyed.
Right. We see a lot of times people who are very successful in their profession and materially commit suicide. It's not, that those are not mutually exclusive. Yeah. I've been a person who has very rich das would, loves the experience of life.
Beautiful. And so I guess just one thing that we've been trying to do is, I know it's going to be tough, but you want to try your hand at maybe summarizing the things we've discussed, and just as a quick bullet point, like summary of it?
We use the Ex Machina as a springboard where there are some interesting questions about robots and morality and whether we have a moral obligation to them and whether they are capable themselves of morality. And to answer the question, we realized we had to understand what sentience is and what intelligence is. And we said that sentience and morality are very connected. So we would feel a moral obligation towards animals because they have sentience. And for sure, of human beings who have a more sophisticated example of expression of sentience. Now, the AI figures in a very tricky way because it has intelligence, but not sentience or consciousness. So it is kind of a spanner in the works, as they say in Australia. It's a curveball because, as they say in America, because for many centuries, the correlation was the more intelligent, the more sentient. So human beings are more intelligent than animals. We have more sentience as well. So in comes AI, and AI has this intelligence, this what we called an external mind intelligence. And we said that itself is not really where morality is. Certainly AI does not have sentience or consciousness, and therefore we shouldn't feel a moral obligation towards it because it's not experiencing pain. That's the first thing. We then went on a further tangent about whether it itself would be capable of morality, and we got into a place where if you only use the external mind and only use proofs and logic, it's very hard to come up with a cohesive sense of what is moral and what is not. You start with suffering, and that's really as far as you get. Other things like cannibalism would perhaps not be immoral. And we contrasted that with the Torah perspective, which is divine, a divine transcendent set of morality, which ascribes has a whole different set of axioms that underpin that set of morality, where suffering is obviously a big component of it, but there's also other things like the divinity of a human being, which feature as an axiom. And so it becomes a whole new moral set, which I believe is the ultimate moral code to follow, and it is by far the best moral code. We said that a human being has an inherent access to that morality from their inner knowledge, which is called their das or their neshama. They would have knowledge of themselves, self-awareness, free will, knowledge of love, the deepest kinds of knowledge, which an animal would not have. And for sure an animal would not have, and then also a AI would not have. And we said that to be a human being means to have a neshama and have das. We should cultivate that. And we said some other things too, but that's a summary.
Rabbi David Kosofsky, thank you so much for joining us. And if anyone listening enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, follow the podcast, listen for more. And thank you, David, again for joining us. And we'll see you next time on the next episode.
My pleasure, Ophir. Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to the Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish Perspective podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you have any suggestions for a moral dilemma you'd like analyzed, feel free to send it over. Thanks again, and see you next time.